If I actually tell you what happened to me during the 11 minutes I was dead, many people simply won't be able to listen until the end. Not because it's a story of terror or violence, but because it challenges, word by word, the comforting idea that we are just flesh, bone, and electrical impulses. What I experienced in that impossible space between my last heartbeat and the moment I returned, against all medical odds, still shakes me deeply every time I relive these memories. And yet I need to share it. Because if someone had told me this before the accident, before the total darkness, before the truth that awaited me on the other side, maybe I would have made completely different choices in my life. So, before continuing, I need to give you an important warning. This is not a story to consume casually. It's not something to listen to while doing other tasks, while browsing social media, or while your attention is divided. What you're about to hear will mess with your deepest beliefs, will touch wounds you might not even know exist, will question who you think you are at the most essential core of your being. It may provoke deep unease, may awaken memories you've worked years to bury, and most importantly, may leave a question echoing in your consciousness for days, weeks, perhaps months after this video ends. Because I'm not just going to report what happened to me while my heart was completely stopped. I'm going to reveal exactly what I saw, felt, and understood when I ceased being a broken body, bleeding inside a destroyed car, and became pure consciousness floating in a space that defies any human description. If you decide to continue, do so knowing that this story was not created to comfort you. It was created to transform you. And believe me, I perfectly understand the devastating weight of that, because it completely destroyed me before rebuilding me into something different. If you're ready, take a few deep breaths. From this moment on, there's no way to return to the same worldview you carried before pressing play on this video. If at some point in your life you've ever felt completely alone in the universe, if you've ever lost someone you loved and were left with questions that no one could answer satisfactorily, if you've ever had that persistent feeling that there's something much greater beyond what we can see and touch, but never had the courage to admit it out loud, then please share this video with someone who also needs to hear these words. This message, for some reason neither you nor I fully understand, chose to reach you now, at this specific moment in your life. I myself would have completely ignored a story like this a few years ago. I would have laughed with contempt, would have scrolled right past without thinking twice, calling it all cheap superstition, the delusion of someone who's suffered brain trauma, or emotional theater to gain views. But now, after everything I've experienced, I know with absolute certainty that certain stories reach us at the exact moment we need them most, even when our rational mind doesn't yet understand. My name is Diego Ramirez, I'm 38 years old, I was born and raised in Guadalajara, and before all this happened to me, I was exactly the type of person who would have stopped watching this video in the first minute. I grew up in a deeply Catholic family, where my grandmother prayed the rosary every night, and my mother lit candles for the saints every week. But I abandoned any trace of religious faith at age 20, when my younger brother, Miguel, my best friend, my companion in all adventures, the only person who truly understood my soul, died at 17 in a violent robbery that should never have happened. An age when life should be just beginning, an age full of dreams, plans, and infinite possibilities. That day marked my definitive and brutal break with any idea of divine purpose, planned destiny, or protective presence in the universe. If there was some God watching over our lives, I didn't want to know about him anymore. If there was any life after death, what cruel sense did it make to tear away someone so young, so full of life, so necessary to the people who loved him? From that devastating moment, I transformed into an efficient machine, hardworking, productive, and completely empty inside. I built a solid career as a civil engineer, earned the professional respect of colleagues and clients, became successful by all the external standards that society uses to measure human worth. But all of this was just an elaborate way of muffling a fear I would never admit out loud, not even to myself in the most vulnerable moments. The deep fear of being completely wrong. The fear that maybe there was indeed something beyond this physical reality, something I was refusing to see with such determination, because recognizing that possibility hurt much more than maintaining my armor of skepticism. I told myself, repeatedly, that I was just a rational person, that modern science explained everything that needed to be explained, that coincidences were just that, statistical coincidences without any deeper meaning. But when the fateful night of the accident finally came, I had already been living on autopilot for so many years that I didn't even notice anymore. It was as if I had systematically erased any trace of emotional vulnerability, replacing everything with constant work, increasingly ambitious professional goals, and artificial deadlines that kept me too busy to feel the emptiness. There was no space in my carefully controlled life for spirituality, for deep reflection, for existential questions, or at least that's what I believed with such conviction. I had no idea that all that mental rigidity, all that militant skepticism I used as protective armor, would be completely shattered in a matter of seconds, and that the truth I was about to know was far beyond anything I imagined being able to withstand psychologically. That October night should have been just another absolutely common and forgettable night. I was leaving the office late, as I always did, carrying that familiar feeling that if I worked just a few more hours, produced just a little more, maybe the internal emptiness would diminish. It was pouring rain, and I was tired enough to notice that my eyes were blinking slower than normal, that my concentration was failing, but not tired enough to admit that I needed to stop, that I needed to rest. The road that cut the path to my house was practically deserted at that late hour, illuminated only by my own diffused headlights and the hypnotic reflection of water accumulated on the irregular asphalt. I remember with surprising clarity the rhythmic and monotonous sound of the windshield wiper, dragging the heavy water from side to side, and the dense silence that filled the car's interior. That kind of heavy silence that, I realize now, always precedes something completely irreversible. That's when I saw the lights. A pair of enormous headlights coming toward me much too fast, too large to be from a regular car. The truck was crossing the lane uncontrollably, skidding sideways, as if being pulled by an invisible and malevolent force. There was no time for any conscious reaction, no space for decision. There was only brutal and instantaneous impact. The deafening sound of metal being crushed, the sharp crack of glass shattering into 1,000 pieces, the entire world spinning violently upside down, my body being thrown against the seatbelt with a force that should have killed me instantly. But what shocked me most, what still confuses me when I think about it, wasn't the physical pain. It was the total absence of it. Right after the initial impact, something inside me simply shut off, as if someone had disconnected an essential cable, and then the impossible happened. I heard a sound I'll never forget, a dry and definitive snap, like a thread being cut with sharp scissors. And suddenly, without any gradual transition, I was no longer inside that destroyed car. My consciousness detached from my physical body as if it had been held only by an invisible thread, too thin to continue holding. I found myself floating above the entire accident scene, observing everything with absolutely impossible visual clarity, much sharper than my normal vision had ever been. I saw my own car completely overturned, with the wheels still spinning slowly in the air. 1 second I was observing the devastating accident scene from above, desperately trying to comprehend how I could still exist, how I could still think and perceive without having a functioning physical body. And the next instant, without any warning, I felt as if something powerful was pulling me backward, into a space that wasn't exactly a place, wasn't exactly time, wasn't darkness or light in the conventional sense. It was just pure consciousness, existence without form, and then the review of my life began. But it was nothing like that cliché image of a movie passing quickly before your eyes. That would be too easy, too simplistic. It was much, much deeper and more disturbing. It was as if each memory, each moment of my existence, became a completely real space, three-dimensional, alive, and I was literally thrown inside it, forced to feel everything again with an emotional intensity impossible to bear when you're alive and protected by the ego. I relived my entire childhood in Guadalajara, my first discoveries of the world. My brother Miguel's contagious laughter when we were little and played in my grandmother's backyard. I literally felt the specific smell of my mother's kitchen, the exact texture of the ceramic floor where I used to play with my toy cars, the pure and innocent joy that I didn't even remember had existed inside me. But that nostalgic softness ended too quickly. The moments I had worked years to forget came, to bury somewhere deep and inaccessible in my psyche. The violent arguments with my father when I was a teenager, the growing emotional distance between me and my entire family after Miguel's brutal death, the people I loved only halfway because I was too afraid to love completely and be hurt again, the crushing feeling of having wasted precious opportunities, of having closed doors that were generously opened to me, of having hurt people who offered me genuine love without asking absolutely anything in return. I couldn't escape those memories. Couldn't justify my selfish actions, couldn't deny the real impact my choices had on other lives. There, in that relentless and honest review, I finally understood a devastating truth. Nothing was ever really hidden. Nothing was forgotten by the universe. And I was never as anonymous, as invisible as I comfortably believed myself to be. The selfish choices I cynically justified as practicality or realism, the prolonged silences that hurt people much more deeply than any cruel words could have hurt, the opportunities for kindness I ignored because I was too busy, too tired, too protected. Everything was being shown without any convenient distortion, without comforting excuses, without the carefully edited narrative my mind had created over the years to protect me. For the first time in my entire existence, I saw my life exactly as it really was, not as my defensive mind insisted it had been. And along with each scene, accompanying each painful memory, came an absolutely devastating feeling that flooded me completely. Shame. Not superficial moral shame, but deep existential shame, the kind of shame that hits the very core of who you think you are. When the review finally ended, after what seemed like hours but may have been only seconds, I felt completely suspended in a silent and absolute void, without physical form, without color, without spatial direction. I didn't know if this would continue indefinitely, if there was something after that liminal state, or if I would be trapped in that eternal suspension, alone with the crushing weight of my own choices. But then, gradually, something fundamental changed around me. First came a soft and welcoming clarity, like the rising of a completely different sun, a sun that doesn't hurt your eyes even when you look directly at it. Then this mysterious clarity began to gain presence, not physical presence in the material sense, but conscious, alive, intelligent presence. It was as if the light itself was somehow impossibly alive, breathing in a rhythm I could feel, perceiving and knowing me before I even fully understood what was happening around me, and then it communicated with me. Not with spoken words, not with sounds that physical ears could capture, but with direct, pure, crystalline meaning, absolutely impossible to be misinterpreted or distorted. The message simply appeared in my consciousness with total clarity. The first truth that luminous presence transmitted to me was so profound, so fundamentally transformative, that it pierced through and completely shattered everything I believed about reality. The message was simple but devastating. Diego, you were never alone. Not for a single moment of your existence were you truly alone. That hit me with an emotional impact much stronger and more transformative than the physical collision with the truck itself. Because at the same instant I received that message, I began to see small specific scenes from my life being reproduced around me, particular moments that I had always categorized and dismissed as mere coincidences, random intuitions, statistical strokes of luck without any deeper meaning. There was no condemnation in that incredible presence, no anger, no demands or moral judgment. There was only love. A love so absolute, so unconditional, so beyond any human love I had ever experienced, that it made me instantly realize how small, how defensive, how closed I had chosen to be throughout my entire earthly life. My militant skepticism, my carefully cultivated intellectual arrogance, my automatic contempt for any form of spirituality. All of this fell around me like heavy and rusted armor before that luminous and incontestable truth. The light didn't impose itself authoritatively. It simply embraced. It received me completely as someone who had always been expected, always been known, always been unconditionally loved. The presence showed me specific situations from my life where something inexplicable seemed to have saved me from dangers I didn't even perceive at the time, subtly guided me in directions that seemed intuitive but weren't, prevented me from making decisions that would have been devastating. And the light revealed to me, with gentleness but absolute clarity, that none of that had been blind chance or random luck. They were real interventions, discreet, careful, always completely respecting my free will, but absolutely real. Silent guides accompanying me through every difficult moment, even when I was screaming internally with such conviction that I was completely alone in the universe, that nobody cared, that nothing had meaning nor purpose. They were there. They always were. And I, in my proud stubbornness, simply refused to perceive, to recognize, to accept. It was right after receiving that transformative message from the luminous presence that something changed profoundly in the atmosphere around me. The light seemed to deliberately open space, as if carefully preparing me to see something or someone my soul had been waiting for so many years, even when my rational mind completely denied that possibility. And then he appeared. Miguel. My brother. Not as a memory, not as a nostalgic projection, not as the frozen image I kept of him at 17. He was there, alive, conscious, completely present and real. His face had the same sweetness and the same mischievous smile as before, but carried something more, a profound maturity, a tranquil wisdom that didn't belong to conventional human time. His eyes shone as if they carried within them all the understanding of the universe. And yet, when he smiled at me with that smile I knew so well, I saw exactly the same boy who used to run with me through our grandmother's backyard, playing soccer until the sun set completely. I felt something inside me completely come undone. An entire emotional wall, built brick by brick over years of accumulated anger, unprocessed grief, defensive denial, simply crumbled and fell. He didn't speak with audible words, but his radiant presence communicated everything with perfect clarity. The love that never diminished, the shared longing, the absolute certainty that nothing, absolutely nothing we lived through together had been in vain. And it was there, in my brother's presence, that I understood a truth I would never have accepted when I was alive and trapped in my own limiting beliefs. The suffering I experienced wasn't divine punishment for some unknown sin. It was refinement. It was transformation. The devastating pain of loss, however cruel and unjust it seemed at the time, had shaped and developed parts of my soul that I never would have developed any other way. I realized with crystalline clarity that life wasn't a random and meaningless path, wasn't a cosmic accident without purpose, as I had so firmly convinced myself for so many years. There was direction. There was deep meaning. There was an invisible but real pedagogy, carefully guiding every moment of my existence, including and especially the moments that most broke and transformed me. Miguel looked at me with those eyes full of understanding, and although he said nothing with words, I perfectly understood his message. Diego, I never left you. Not for a day, not for an hour. I was always close. And in that impossible to adequately describe instant, all the bitterness of my skepticism completely dissolved. There was no more pain. No more paralyzing fear. No more crushing weight. There existed only a love so absolute, so complete, that it made any earthly memory seem like a distant and insignificant noise. I sincerely believed that was the end of my journey, or rather, the beginning of a new permanent existence in that place of love and understanding. But then, like a silent but powerful wave, a new understanding began to grow within my consciousness. It didn't come as an authoritarian order, nor as an external imposition. It was more like knowledge emerging from within myself. The light manifested again, not with audible words, but with that same crystalline, penetrating meaning, impossible to ignore. Diego, there is still something important that only you can fulfill. Your earthly journey is not complete. You need to go back. That phrase tore through me inside with a pain that was purely spiritual. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to feel physical pain again, didn't want to carry the weight of material existence, didn't want to face life again with all its torturous uncertainties and open wounds that never completely heal. But going back meant taking responsibility. It meant confronting everything I had run from for so many years. It meant transforming and healing what I had broken and destroyed. And even with my soul desperately pleading to remain in that home of unconditional love, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I needed to make the difficult choice. I needed to choose the pain, the unfinished journey, the work that still remained to be done. Thus, with a sensation of deep rupture that still hurts when I remember, I made the most difficult decision of my entire existence. I chose to return to life. When I returned to my body, There was no softness whatsoever, no gradual or gentle transition. It was like being violently ripped from an entire universe of love and understanding and brutally pushed back into a body too small, too limited, too painful, too noisy. The doctors told me afterward, with voices full of disbelief, that my heart had been completely stopped for 11 minutes. 11 minutes clinically dead. 11 minutes beyond physical life. 11 minutes outside of matter. 11 minutes that absolutely changed everything about who I am and how I see reality. The first sound I heard was the accelerated and urgent beeping of medical machines, then the audible shock in the paramedics' voices, frightened, incredulous, relieved. My entire chest burned as if it was being literally reignited from within. But behind that artificial hospital light, I still felt the other light, the true one, the one that permanently stayed with me. I hadn't returned empty. I came back carrying a certainty that simply cannot be unlearned. Death is not the end, and there is a profound purpose stitching together every detail of our existence, even when we believe we are completely alone. If this story touched something inside you, share it with those who need to hear it. For today, I end here.